It's time for community conversations. We're working on a theme song, so hopefully soon it will be up. What's up? What's up? It is Tuesday, May 31st, 7:01 p.m. on the East Coast. It is time for another edition of Community Conversation. It is week to week, back to back, which is super exciting because we get to hang out. God, I look old. I look tired. I look old and tired. I don't know. This light. Supposedly these lights are supposed to make you look, good. Anyway, if you're just joining, please say hello. Let us know you're here. Hi, Deirdre. As always, and we'll get started just a few minutes after the hour. Hi, Grace. Hi, Yvonne. Hope everyone is having a great week so far. I've had a good long weekend if you were able to take off. Hey, MV. Hey, Gentile. Maybe that's right. Oh, Katie with the rhymes. You're not old and tired. You're young and inspired. I like it. Mike Sizemore in the house. Yes, that is accurate. I don't know what it is. The original Nintendo games are the most difficult video games there have ever been. They're really hard. I totally agree with you as someone who likes retro games, for sure. Hi, John. We got Daniel coming out of the gate with some questions. And Daniel, I'll get to that momentarily. Hi, all from Brenda and I'm gonna Fredericton. Okay, New Brunswick, Canada. Welcome, Brenda. Yeah, we'll get started in exactly 4 seconds. But if you're just joining us, hi from Texas. Hey, cats. If you're just joining us, let me know. Say hello and where you're from. Katie, we don't have every NES game. Like we have them. Yes, I have a modded little NES with all 723 games on it, but we don't actually have the physical games, although I came close at one point. Not to brag. Okay, so let's get started and let's get into some good conversation. So my name is Ethan. I'm a national advocate for the International OCD Foundation. As I always say, yes, we can't play them. As I always say, simply means I have OCD and I won't stop talking about it weekly now at this point. Hi from Brazil. Awesome. I hope you are doing well in Brazil. Just some quick housekeeping. This community conversation is intended to serve as educational content. It is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you're in distress or feel unsafe. If you're in crisis or you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. We also always want to be respectful of others and kind and create as safe a space as possible. As we know, this is being broadcast on all the major social media streams and platforms and being recorded for all eternity. And that's a good thing because we want people to be able to access really meaningful conversation around OCD, but that also means if you're divulging personal information, everyone can see it. So just keep that in mind as we do. But these streams are always extremely supportive and wonderful. And so I'm excited for tonight's conversation. Beth Carducci. Yes, I love that. Happy anniversary to Beth. I've been here for a year tomorrow. I love that. We should have thrown a party. I wish I'd known that. You got to email me next time. Maybe next time we'll throw a Beth Carducci party. I like that. So I hope everyone's having a good one. As I always start, how's everyone doing? I know it's just been a week, but how's everyone doing? How has your week treated you? How is your OCD or anxiety? I definitely have some topics for tonight, and maybe we'll try to actually touch on some. But as always, always open it up to questions right out of the gate. So yes. With that, well, let's go ahead and grab. Well, everybody's kind of answering how they are, and please feel free to comment. Let's go ahead and bring up Daniel's question at Where was it? I thought Daniel had a question. Am I making this up? Here we go. Thank you. 7:01 p.m. Hey, Ethan, can you talk about OCD and complex PTSD comorbidity as it relates to treatment? It's a great question, Daniel. And I think that while I'm not, I'm not a clinician, and nor would I say that I'm an expert in OCD. But I think they can both be treated simultaneously, but I think the treatments are very different. So I think that exposure response prevention is a really effective treatment for OCD, and complex PTSD has its own set of treatments ranging from dialectical behavioral therapy to EMDR to other modalities of treatment. Because what happens is with complex PTSD, long-term exposure to that doesn't necessarily help you reduce anxiety. You don't necessarily habituate. So the way you approach it is different. And I wish I could talk about it more. My understanding of complex PTSD is a little bit more limited, in the sense that I actually have PTSD. I don't have complex PTSD, and I know what I've done for my PTSD. Like I said, DBT was really, really helpful in dealing with that. So was some exposure around the triggers and the memories and things like that. But because complex PTSD, excuse me, happens over time and it includes multiple events, I know that treatment can look very different. So I wish I could speak more to that, but I'm not ever afraid to say what I don't know. But what is tomorrow? No, not a good question. But Daniel, I know a couple great people you could talk to, so I'll give my email out at the end, and I can direct you to some folks to give you some good insight into both of those things, how they relate to each other, and treatment for both. So thank you for that. Good question. I don't like being stumped. I was kind of stump-ish. And followed up with, thanks, Ethan, I have both, and I think symptoms of CPTSD affect my OCD treatment and vice versa. And that's probably true, Daniel. One relates, there's a lot of crossover with stress and anxiety and so forth. And so I'm not surprised that that one affects the other and they're all integrated. So I think how you approach it is important. But I know a number of folks that actually have CPTSD as well as OCD and see therapists for both and simultaneously. So I know that they can work in treatment co-occurringly. And so, definitely have hope around that. And I think you already have some really good insight. So, let's continue to have the conversation and see what kind of help you can find. That's not the right word I was looking for, but definitely shoot me an email and we'll continue having the conversation. I can definitely direct you to some folks that may be able to help. So thank you for that question. I appreciate it. My comment, sorry, I was distracted because my comments keep scrolling up and sometimes this is a little glitchy. Also, Daniel, yes, thank you, Skyla. Tomorrow is an Ask the Experts, and I'll announce that, but 12 p.m. Eastern on all of these platforms. So you can also ask Dr. Liz McInvale and Chris Tronsden are doing a live stream tomorrow with Dr. Carolyn Rodriguez, who is a psychiatrist, an MD and PhD out of Stanford. Quite brilliant, awesome person, individual, human being. So they'll be talking about all kinds of interesting things, mostly medication, probably tomorrow if they're having Carolyn on. But with that being said, Liz and Chris are well versed in most topics. So also feel free to tune in live and ask your questions, please. It's actually just looking. A lot of people are resonating with PTSD. Great question. What's DBT? I apologize. I should have elaborated on that. How's everyone doing? Give me some feedback. How are y'all feeling lately? And is there anything you want to talk about that's important to you? Always happy to just answer questions, but is there anything important you want to talk about? Patricia, this is a great question. 7:04 p.m. When did you feel ready to start a relationship? And I would imagine that's in context of, the OCD. And I think it's a very personal question, but it's a great question. I have a very strong point of view in this subject matter. You don't have to agree with it, and that's okay. But for me, um, and looking back, I was very adamant on reaching a level or stage of wellness before I engaged in actively seeking out a relationship. And I did that mostly because before I got better, I mean, all of my relationships were so clearly defined by OCD. They all lasted exactly 4 months because that was the amount of time it took before my OCD really took hold. Before this was in my 20s, but things got serious to a point where, you know, the women I was dating wanted me to stay over more regularly or go on longer trips and all the things that my OCD was terrified of doing. And so it was very hard for me until we'd always break up at 4 months because that's right when, oh, can you come visit me? I'm in school or whatever. And I was scared to travel and all this stuff. Right. So I also, wanted to reach a place where the OCD didn't dictate or define decisions I made within my relationship. And that was really important to me. And so, I kind of stopped pursuing relationships prior to becoming bedridden just because I didn't want it to be such an impact in my relationships. And then I got better and started dating again. And it was a really wonderful experience because that's not to say that I didn't talk about OCD or I didn't. I mean, another follow-up question, Patricia, that people often ask is, when do I divulge? When do I tell someone that I have OCD if I'm dating them or whatever? And we can talk about that as well. But I think that, for me, I really wanted to be in a place where the OCD wasn't really dictating function, wasn't dictating decisions around relationships, where I was able to make value-driven decisions within those relationships. Didn't mean I made smart decisions. I made some dumb decisions, and I didn't even need OCD for that. But so I think it's a very personal thing. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that you can't be in a relationship if you're struggling or if you're in the middle of treatment, but typically if we're in the middle of an intensive round of treatment or we're really struggling, I think it's a good thing to hold off on major decisions until you get a little bit more objectivity and insight. That may not be a popular opinion. It's my opinion. Um, I know for me, it made a lot of sense in that regard. And I think it's important to follow your gut and follow your heart. But I think it can be very easy to want to seek out reassurance in a variety of ways. And I think a relationship gives a lot of people reassurance, whether it's somebody to lean on, somebody to trust, somebody who doesn't know about OCD that you can confess to or get to enable you or reassure you. You don't want to fall into that trap. So, the healthiest type of relationship is one where you're really in a pretty good place with your treatment and your OCD as a whole. Not saying you have to be perfect, not saying that you can't, be struggling or anything like that. It's not black or white. There's definitely shades of gray. Um, but that's when I felt ready to engage in a relationship, and hopefully that makes sense to you. But there's also lots of situations where I know folks that met in treatment, and they have beautiful relationships. So by no means the end all be all, but that's kind of my take on it. And I feel pretty passionately about that because I don't think you can give back to someone else unless you're able to take care and give back to yourself first, the whole oxygen mask first. So I feel really adamant about like being in a position to um, give back to someone in a selfless way and love someone truthfully, and not let OCD try to manipulate that is important. And so, um, you know, so thank you, Patricia. That's a great question. I love that. Okay, let's see here. It's too hot. I nailed a bunch of tens yesterday. Too bad OCD. Sorry, not sorry. I love that, Beth. Uh, Yvonne, been hanging by a thread day by day. I'm sorry to hear that. Although threads can be pretty strong, so give yourself some compassion and credit. But if you want to elaborate a little bit, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Uh, Gentile, I hope I'm getting that right. Tell me if I'm wrong or phonetically spell it. I apologize. From Brazil, I remember that. I can't talk to my friends properly because of intrusive thoughts, so it's kind of rough. I'm so sorry to hear that. Do you have a specific question around that? Maybe I can elaborate and give you some insight into potentially how to talk with your friends. Um, so thank you for that comment. Um, At 7:06 p.m., John says, I'm from Ireland, but I live in Canada. I had bad intrusive thoughts last night and some ritualized lock checking. I am staying positive, though. Well, I'm glad you're staying positive. I mean, first of all, you're here, and that's a massively positive step. Second of all, there's help, there's hope, there's treatment, and this is a very treatable disease and disorder. And I always say that very humbly because it doesn't feel like that at times. It feels really hard, and treatment can take time. And I mean, it did for me for years, and it was definitely an uphill battle for a long time. But there's good reason to stay positive because there's a lot of ways to kick OCD's ass, and hopefully we can highlight some ways for you, John, today. But I'm glad you're being positive, and I would challenge you potentially to challenge your intrusive thoughts around the lock checking. If there's a fear, if it's unlocked, and what might happen, being willing to embrace that fear, for that fear to be, to become true, in an effort to, not let OCD rule, and to take control. But thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. What's DBT? Great question. 7:07 p.m. So dialectical behavioral therapy. DBT is a good adjunctive treatment to ERP and ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. Those are both exposure therapies, and ERP is the gold standard first line treatment for OCD. But there's a lot of cases and argument and research saying that ACT might be too. We know that ERP in conjunction with ACT is really, really effective. DBT was a real game changer for me, along with ACT. And DBT specifically is around, and I talked about it in regards to PTSD, but it's really beneficial in individuals with OCD who have a lot of emotional dysregulation. So, and I did, which was a real barrier to treatment for me. So I would go into treatment or therapy, I would do an exposure, and I would completely dysregulate. And so, I would go on 2 and 3 hour crying jags where I wasn't responding to anything, calm down or just focus on, I was just literally gone. There was a shield around me and I was crying, and I went through, a clinician's stash of Kleenex in a day, and they had like months supplies of Kleenex. So DBT was really effective in helping me ground myself, mindfulness, a lot of skills and tools around becoming present, and emotional regulation. But DBT is a wonderful skill also around PTSD and other traumatic events. Also in terms of regulating your emotions and retelling your story and changing the story, I should say, how it plays in your head, where you are today. And again, obviously PTSD, intrusive memories. Why am I blanking on intrusive memories? And it'll come to me. I apologize. It's been a day, as I always say that, but what day isn't? Flashbacks. And it's all about sort of becoming present and how you can sort of ground yourself in reality in the moment. And DBT is really effective at that. I encourage anyone to Google dialectical behavioral therapy. I have a great workbook on DBT as it relates to PTSD, and I highly recommend it. I think it's over here. Actually, I have the PTSD workbook, but it's basically a DBT workbook. So yeah, that in a nutshell is what DBT is. And a lot of times, if you see individuals in residential or in intensive outpatient that really aren't responding because they're so dysregulated, a lot of recommendations for those individuals will be to seek DBT treatment in preparedness for coming back and doing OCD, doing ERP and related therapies. So that's the quick version of DBT, but it really is a wonderful adjunct to all of the treatments. And you're welcome, Daniel. Mike Sizemore, a question that I would like to get answered. Well, Mike, you're a veteran, so I'm happy to answer your question. 7:09 p.m. Skyla, sorry about that. I am a terrible host for Skyla. I just make her guess. I just read random stuff. I've gotten really lazy, and I apologize to her. I know it's not a clinical conversation, but do you think that PTSD can be caused by long-term OCD itself without any other traumatic experiences? I think that's a really good question. And the short answer is yes, I think so. Not my clinical, I'm not a clinician. I think that OCD in and of itself can be very traumatizing for a variety of reasons, right? The pain, the suffering, the compulsions, what you may do as a compulsion to alleviate the anxiety. You may do something traumatic. I think there's a lot of ways PTSD relates to OCD. And we've talked about this in some panels in the past at the conferences, and PTSD is becoming, and PTSD and trauma specifically are becoming coming to the forefront of a lot of these conversations. For me, I'll give you my own personal example of the PTSD that I experienced because of OCD. But I think as it relates to OCD, there can be a number of things, right? The OCD itself and how you relate to it, and the destruction that it causes in your life can be traumatizing. There can be an inciting event. You could participate in a compulsion that is traumatizing, or something can happen to you because of the OCD that is also traumatic. In the retelling of this, and I share this sometimes, but in the retelling of my PTSD event, it actually sounds kind of funny. It wasn't at the time, but I have talked about it before. But essentially, I was in a psychiatric hospital the first time, as you've heard, many of you who have been here have heard me talk about a number of times. And this was before I accessed exposure response prevention. It was about a week. I accessed a week after I got out of the psychiatric hospital. But while I was there, I was, I'd hit the rock of bottoms, and was really, really, really sick. And I think it was my second night in there, and I was terrified and scared. And I was there for 3.5 weeks, which was 3.5 weeks too long. And this was when I was afraid I was hitting my head, and I was, presenting as if I were delusional. I was just I believed so much in my fears and my thoughts. And it was night 2, and I woke up and I was convinced that I hit my head and caused a brain bleed. So I started freaking out and dysregulating and crying and screaming that I wanted help, and I wanted to go to the hospital. And so, the nurses came in and they gave me some Ativan, which is a benzo shot, short-term, relieves anxiety and all this stuff. And I'm debating how deep to go into this story, because it can be a triggering story for both me and this. But the gist of it is that the nurse that gave me the shot left, and another nurse came in and asked me if she could sit with me and hold my hand while I calmed down. So I actually really appreciated that. She sat there, and then she put her hand over my stomach and started to do an exorcism in speaking in her native. She was from Bahamas or Jamaica, and she was speaking in her language, and I just kept hearing blood of Jesus along. So if you can picture, you're in a mental hospital, you're not crazy, but you also can't help it because it's OCD, but the people there think you're psychotic. You were just given Ativan, and now a woman is performing an exorcism on you. So I start screaming because it was terrifying, and I kept saying stop, and she wouldn't stop. And then it just escalated. I talk about, like, I was totally a mess. And then all kinds of things happened, from, the guards in the hospital grabbing me to being tied down. And for years and years and years, I had nightmares about that event, and I don't anymore. And occasionally smells and things will give me some flashbacks to that period of time. But I've coped with it enough that I feel like I have a pretty good handle on the experience. But that's the long-winded version of saying that, I was there because of my OCD, and the event that happened was because of a misdiagnosis, right? They diagnosed me there as being psychotic and not having OCD. So I know that wasn't quite what you were talking about, Mike, but at the end of the day, it was OCD instigated, and that's my traumatic event, and something that I dealt with for many, many years after the fact, where I couldn't go into certain places, or really struggled to go into certain places because they smells or reminded me things of. It's really difficult. And so I 100% think that long-term OCD and different specific elements within that OCD and your OCD journey can cause PTSD and trauma without any other traumatic events. So good question, Mike. That's my personal opinion. Be curious to what you all think. Let's see here. Hi, Cats. Texas, recommendations, 7:10 p.m., Skyla. Recommendations for parents with OCD to meet other parents with OCD, like support groups and stuff. That's a great question. There's some great parent support groups. The IOCDF, if you go to iocdf.org, should have some resources on parent support groups and other resources for parents. There are also Facebook groups, groups on Instagram. If I'll give out my email, and if you email me, Kat, I will send you some specific links to ways to connect with other parents that are other parents with OCD as well. I want to recommend for parents with OCD to meet other parents. Okay, I want to make sure I read that, and not parents of children with OCD. And in fact, I would wager that there are some individuals on here that have OCD that are also parents. So please, if they haven't already, please feel free to comment. Hi, Alexandra. I know I'm behind. I'm going to quickly scroll down just to see what people are saying. Thank you for support group, Skyla. I appreciate that. Just some comments on PTSD. Oh, Alexandra's here. So Alexandra, I'm going to throw this to Alexandra. So let's see here. I'm going to just quickly do some sleuthing. I don't know if Daniel is still here, but if Alexandra is still here, I'm going to... Alexandra, would you mind, Skyla, would you mind bringing this back up at 7:01 p.m.? Daniel's question to me. Alexandra, if you're here, just type in the chat your thoughts on this question, which is, can you talk about OCD and complex PTSD comorbidity as it relates to treatment? And Daniel goes on to later talk about how one treatment is impacting the other or interfering with the other and vice versa. And I know you have a lot of experience with CPTSD and obviously ERP and OCD. And I was like, where's Alexandra? She could definitely answer this far better than I could. So Alex, if you're around and wouldn't mind posting some thoughts on that in the chat, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back up, but I just quickly wanted to see what was cooking down at the bottom of the text, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Good conversation as always. Thank you all. And y'all are awesome. Okay. So going back up, Tiffany wrote, I think there's a question in here. I know it got cut off. My son is 12 and has at 7:11 p.m. My son is 12 and has OCD. He takes SSRIs and does EXRP once a week. We also have a working diagnosis for pandas. I didn't know his OCD themes would change. It took us 2 months to figure out this was happening, but it is unusual for the theme to take a 180-degree turn. For example, this was being just right. Kid's smart. He struggled to talk to people that were athletic due to sports not relating to intelligence and OCD's opinion. But now his theme, did you continue the question? If you did or had a specific question, Tiffany, please go ahead and post it. I think Skyla's trying to. Thank you, Skyla. Just right athletic, enough calories burned, playing all sports, being outdoors enough, exercising, and being a champion in general. Is this typical for it to change, and how often? And is it often the direct opposite? Great question, Tiffany. So yeah, we're basically talking about morphing and shifting OCD themes and subtypes. The morphing and changing and shifting can be very, very common, and it is very, very common. And I know it can catch a lot of people by surprise, especially the individual with OCD. It can happen as quickly as, a week, every other week, every 2 weeks, or it can be years before a symptom shifts and changes. I would hope that they taught you this, Tiffany. I almost called you Tiff and realized that might offend you. So, but maybe we're friends. I'll say Tiff. I'm going to live with the discomfort of you being really pissed at me for calling you Tiff. I think that the beautiful thing about ERP, and we talk about this often, is that exposure response prevention is a modality of treatment that can treat any subtype or symptom. And it's really plug and play, right? It's all about embracing the uncertainty, regardless of the OCD thoughts and feelings and compulsions. It's about resisting compulsions and what is that way to challenge yourself when you find yourself compulsing. So exposure response prevention, we use ERP for any subtype and any symptom. So once you have that foundation, for instance, let's see, whatever the original, so the just right. And if your son did ERP around just right, and then it shifted, we can take what it shifted to and apply ERP to it and start working on resisting compulsions and get a pretty solid, have a very impactful result as in doing so. So it's very important, very, very important to understand that. And this is something I wish I learned early on. So, and as far as it being the opposite, I've seen the opposite shift. So for instance, I really cared about my own danger and my own life. I didn't care about any else's. I just didn't want anything to happen to me. Very selfish. When I fell in love and with my fiance, I suddenly worried about her and not worried about me, which is the opposite, right? And I was like, wow, this is great. I'm not worried about your life and I don't care about my life. It went back pretty quickly to me again, which is my comfort zone. But if anything, if I can teach you anything about this, it's so important to realize that you're not doing ERP that's for a specific symptom. In other words, there isn't, if you did ERP, you got better from your symptom, and then it came back as something else, it morphed, it shifted into something completely different. That doesn't mean that you then have to go back, right, to do ERP around that particular symptom until that one gets better. It's not about the content, it's about the treatment. And so once you have ERP in your skill set and your toolbox, you can use those skills and tools against any intrusive thought, obsession, compulsion, and all of the above. Now, that doesn't mean that you can do it by yourself. You might need the support of a therapist again, right? But it's not about, you don't need to be cured or take care of this new theme. It really is about, how do I apply ERP to that new theme? So in essence, when you first go to a therapist with a theme or subtype, they're using that theme or subtype to introduce you to ERP. It's not really about that theme or subtype. It's really about teaching you exposure and response prevention. So once you have that foundation, you can apply it to really any theme or subtype that comes out throughout your life, right? And the nuances of that treatment are different depending on what you're dealing with. But in essence, the essence of it is the same, which is, am I willing to live with the uncertainty of whatever the fear is? Am I willing to be afraid and experience anxiety? Am I willing to not compulse in an effort to reduce the anxiety? Because I know if I don't, then over time, the anxiety will decrease on its own and the obsessive thoughts will decrease on their own. If I continue to just experience it without judgment and continue to act in a value-driven way. And those concepts and precepts carry over to any subtype and any symptom, which is why you might hear a lot of therapists say the content doesn't matter, and I know that can feel minimizing, especially, anybody's content feels really intense and scary and terrifying. And it's like, how can you say that it doesn't matter? Well, what they're really saying is, regardless of your subtype or symptom, it's all OCD. And it's important to realize that, because we don't want anyone to think that their OCD is special than someone else's OCD and therefore not treatable, right? So we're just all saying that regardless of what your subtype or symptom is, that's OCD. And if it is OCD, then it can be treated with exposure response prevention. I'm also not sitting here saying that ERP works for everybody right away, or ERP doesn't take time, or there aren't a variety of tactics and modalities of treatment that need to be employed to help you get better. So this is not a one size fits all or any stretch of the imagination, but it is important to recognize that themes, subtypes, symptoms shift, but that doesn't mean that you're sick again. That doesn't mean that you've fallen down and you're heading back toward another rock bottom. That simply means that you have OCD. And if you've been through exposure and response prevention, you now have the skills and tools to manage it and handle it. And again, that doesn't mean that you may not, that doesn't mean that you won't need support. Maybe you do, and that's okay. That is the super long-winded answer of basically saying it is very common for shifts and morphs, and it can all be managed with ERP and ACT and other modalities of treatment. Great question, Tiffany. Thank you. Let's keep scrolling down. I want to try to get to some questions that I haven't answered before, for some folks that I haven't answered before. Here we go. So yes, Gentile at 7:18 p.m. I asked for this question: how do I manage having a proper convo with my friends while having intrusive thoughts? Great question. So I'm wondering what is inhibiting you from having a conversation? Is it your intrusive thoughts are so intense that you're having trouble focusing and being present, and so you're not listening to the conversation, so you can't follow along? Um, is it that you're seeking reassurance from your friends, or you have an ulterior motive and it's really not about the conversation? There's a variety. In other words, there's a variety of ways that intrusive thoughts can impair a conversation. I know for me, I'll get stuck in my head and I'll tune everything out. And so, if that were ongoing, so when I think about, at my worst, or when I was really struggling, or when I was in residential, like people would talk to me, but I couldn't have a conversation with them because I was so stuck in my head. It was really hard for me to engage. So, depending on what the reason is, we can definitely address perhaps how to address the issue in a way that can allow you to have conversations with your friends. And I mean, the short answer of it is treatment, right? Engage in a clinician. I actually know some brilliant clinicians in Brazil and that also treat in Brazil. So I will give out my email at the end, and if you want some recommendations for some therapists in Brazil and also therapists in America that are licensed in Brazil, I'm happy to suggest. Just above that, I am so sorry. Yeah, like I lose some parts of the conversation because I'm preoccupied with responding to my intrusive thoughts. So sometimes I react to something I didn't even hear. Okay, so that's what I suggested. That was right above. I'm so sorry I missed that. Um, so so for you, the real key will be trying to stay present. We feel that we have to pay attention to our intrusive thoughts because it feels irresponsible if we don't. Whatever the intrusive thought is, it's something we should pay attention to. It's something we must pay attention to. And then we need to diffuse it because otherwise, if we don't pay attention to it, it's irresponsible. And whatever the fear or discomfort might happen or come true. So we have to, whatever the intrusive thought is, pay it mind. Your goal is to be as present as possible and come back to the moment as present as possible. I mean, as many times as possible. So what does that look like? So I'll give you an example. And I don't know if any of the friends that you're talking about is a friend that you'd feel comfortable enough sharing this with. And again, at the end of the day, the best thing you can do is, meet with a clinician, and treatment, will obviously help with this. But when I was dating, and I was in recovery, sort of my recovery phase of my treatment, I struggled with the same thing. And I would bring my girlfriend at the time to therapy and talk about this. And one of the things that my therapist suggested to my girlfriend was, if you see Ethan kind of wandering off or not paying attention, or his eyes start to wander, ask him, hey, I'm talking. Are you here? What were you thinking about? Were you thinking about some of your stuff? And she was a great help in helping me come back to the present moment. And I mean, this applies to anyone, right? A parent, a friend, a significant other. So that's one really great way. If you're comfortable, and by no means do you have to divulge if you're not comfortable. But and the case of me, it was really helpful because sometimes, when you're just starting out in treatment or therapy, or you're trying to get your bearings, having that inside of objectivity is really low. So, you might say to me, yeah, Ethan, but I don't know when I'm wandering off. Like I don't come to until 10 minutes later. And then by then I don't have a clue what the conversation is going on. And that's totally understandable. You're fused with your thoughts. So that's when we can use a little help with somebody pointing out, hey, you okay? I saw you kind of wandering off. You don't have to tell me anything about that, but let's try and maybe you can take a friend, if you have a dear friend that maybe knows you struggle with OCD, maybe practice that. Maybe take 30 minutes or an hour and sit down with your friend and say, like, let's talk. And when you see me wander off, wave. Sometimes my Amy, my ex-girlfriend, would, raise her hand and that would grab my attention. But that was a way that helped me when I was kind of struggling with the same thing. So perhaps you can relate to some of those things there. Thank you, Skyla, for the awesome information on ACT and DBT. You rock. Rachel, hi Rachel. Hope you're well. How much therapy, counseling, etc. is too much? For various reasons, I have different interventions from different resources. It's hard to prioritize. That's a great question. When therapy starts getting in the way of living, so at a certain point, you're going to learn and know and have the education about everything you need to. Now, I'm just talking about OCD. So, and sort of related disorders and anxiety and things like that. So, in my own experience, there was a point in which my therapist said, there's nothing else we can teach you. You either need to do this stuff or not do this stuff. So it is time to go fly. And as the mother bird, I'm going to kick you out of the nest and you got to flap your wings and go. Right. So at a certain point, therapy becomes maladaptive because it suddenly, and I know for me, I didn't want to go dive into life. Therapy started to become a very comfortable place for me. So when that starts to happen, the best thing you can do for yourself, especially when you have a lot of the skills and tools, is to then start using them in a real world experience. Doesn't mean that you have to quit therapy altogether. Doesn't mean that, but what does it look like to start to reintegrate life into therapy and so forth, and start to titrate down on the therapy, right? So, the other question we have to ask ourselves is, well, how do you know? And, so in my case, I was still in a place where I wanted to get better, but I still didn't know how to flip the switch and engage in treatment. But I knew everything, right? So it was a really purposeful move to push me out into life, because they were hoping that it would force me to start to flip the switch and support myself using the treatment that I had learned, ERP, ACT, DBT, all the stuff we've been talking about. And it did. It did just that, right? So I think, and that's also a conversation you can have with your therapist. When do you think I'm ready to titrate down? Do you need to see me once every other week or once a month? Do you think I need to engage in life? Is it time? Is it ready? And also check in with yourself as well. But at the end of the day, now I see a therapist once a week. I have for the last 12 years since I got better. Okay. So, I'm not at all encouraging that you shouldn't go to therapy or shouldn't see a therapist, but there's a difference between being in residential treatment for 2 years and seeing a therapist once a week. And that therapy conversation is about just managing life, and life is hard, and engaging in value-driven behaviors and things like that. So I would ask all of those questions and kind of see where you land and do an inventory. But great question. Great question, Rachel. And I always appreciate your questions. John, I think I have OCD. What should I do? 7:21 p.m. Visit the IOCDF.org. There are a ton of resources. Read on it. And there's a resource directory where you can access treatment providers. Treatment. That is the number one thing, is try to engage a treatment provider. And, there's help, there's hope. And OCD is treatable, and you can live a beautiful, full life. So, and thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. I always enjoy seeing you. Sounds like Jim is referring to at 7:23 p.m. for me, seeing my mom die very unpleasantly caused my PTSD. The OCD, again, in my opinion, came from having to be too responsible, too young, worry about everything, attempt to be perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that's really personal, and I can't imagine what that was like for you, Jim. So thank you for sharing that. There's this idea. It's also common for OCD to present after a traumatic experience. We've talked about different milestones. We've talked about being born with it. What is true is that there's always a predisposition for OCD, whether it remains benign and dormant, or it comes on, remains to be seen, and there's this really great conversation around, like, there's the biological underpinnings of OCD, right? And then there's the behavioral underpinnings of OCD. And what I mean by that is, at first, when you first start engaging in obsessions and compulsions, and it becomes that disorder that interferes with your life, that's a very biological behavior. It's your brain chemistry, and it's your neurons firing, and it's the science in your head. It's the chemistry, basically, the disorder, the disease, if you will. kicking in and really creating this discomfort around whatever the thought and the feeling is. The behavioral piece of that is, as you do it, it becomes a learned behavior and it becomes routine, right? And then it gets hard to discern what's behavioral and what's biological, in the sense that, in my own journey, I did the same things for 20 years, so I have no idea when it was something I was just used to doing and it was so behavior oriented at that time, and when it was actually biology kicking in. And it gets to be messy in that way. I think everything that you're saying here, Jim, makes a ton of sense. And I also think that there's, a lot of things we can do to address the PTSD and the OCD. And I think the why is important to a certain extent, especially if there's the OCD was onset around something traumatic or uncomfortable or awful in this case. But that doesn't mean that it can't be treated and treated effectively. So I appreciate you sharing. I think you have really good insight into the why and the what, and from there, you can start working on ways to not be too responsible, or to not worry, or attempt to be perfect. Exposures around that might look like being under responsible, not worrying, or not worrying sounds really offensive. Like, just stop worrying. I know it's not that easy, obviously, but be willing to make mistakes, sort of living with the discomfort of what if I weren't these things? What if I cared a little less about certain things? What if I let things go? Again, you're talking about too responsible, too young. It's this idea of over responsibility. And I talked earlier about it feeling irresponsible to ignore the thoughts. So, if you're responsible for people, and that becomes sort of a sticky point for you, it feels irresponsible to not sort of dissect and figure out whatever it is you're worried about as it pertains to other people. It feels like you're ignoring them. It feels like you're putting their lives at risk, their life at risk. And so that all makes sense, Jim. And thank you for sharing. And Brenda, you're welcome. Yeah, it was absolutely horrifying and it wasn't fun, but if it's part of my journey. And so that's so thank you for that. 7:28 p.m. ZSMH91. Can you describe exposures for real event and moral scrupulosity theme? Sure. I mean, real exposures, or are honestly no different for real event and moral scrup than they would be anything else, which is this idea of, maybe I am a bad person. Maybe I did do a bad thing. Maybe I am morally flawed. Maybe I am. Maybe I will never be redeemed. Maybe I may do that thing again in the future. Now, why would I think those things? Why would I be willing to sit with that? Well, all the ERPs are around embracing uncertainty. And we do that because ERP is not about proving to yourself that you are or you're not something, that something is or isn't going to happen. It's about learning to sit with the discomfort of the uncertainty of maybe, maybe not. And when you do that, suddenly the will it or won't it becomes less important. So, the next question I want to ask you is, so, I don't know your real event specifically, and usually they're tied into moral scrup, right? And feeling like a bad person, or that you were a bad person, or that that thing that you did made you a bad person. And how do you move forward knowing that that was in your past and that's in you and you may do it again, and all that stuff? I would ask you, what are you giving up right now? What are you losing? How does it interfere with moving toward your values? And what can you do as a person now? Like, what are your choices moving forward? How can you give back? How can you live a full life? How can you be a meaningful person in your family or friends or society or whatever that is, right? And typically those things that we hold on to, that the OCD is sticky, prevents all that stuff from happening. And so you ultimately have a choice, which is let all of your decisions moving forward be dictated by that maybe, maybe not in the past, from that real event. And yes, it really happened. But are you willing to accept the possibility that you are or you're not, whatever your fear is, in an effort to move forward being the best possible version of yourself. I would argue that's a really good trade-off. Because while you can't go back and change whatever that thing was, you have lots of choices moving forward. So don't give up those opportunities. You have infinite amount of opportunities ahead of you. Don't let the one thing from before dictate your path moving forward. I have a frog in my throat. Yes, Alexandra, thank you for, real quick, I'll read her answer for any of those that were interested when we were talking about CPTSD and OCD at 7:29 p.m., Skyla. So I'm not certain of the rates of comorbidity, but that's something that I know the IOCDF is looking into. I can say that in my experience, it was really important to treat my OCD and CPTSD separately, but together, if that makes sense. It's called parallel treatment, and it means both the OCD and CPTSD are treated as separate entities, but at the same time, which is what I said. But candidly, I said it because I learned it from her before. So technically, I'm stealing her brilliance, but regardless, and then we can continue on as long as we're at 7:32 p.m. What I found is that when I become triggered with OCD, my CPTSD often becomes triggered and vice versa. So having treatment for both was helpful in getting my symptoms for both under control. CPTSD is poorly understood in my experience, and treating it with OCD can be tough because many methodologies will cause you to ruminate on trauma as it comes up. It's very important for me to have a trauma specialist who allowed me to process things on my terms and who helped teach me distress tolerance. Well put, Alexandra. Thank you. Thank you for showing up. I am just scrolling down here, seeing what else we got. Thank you for all the really kind words. Pam, hi from Sydney. First time watching live. Thanks, Ethan, for doing these live sessions and supporting the community. You're welcome. Sydney's on a bucket list, so let's become friends, and then I'll come visit and let me know what's for dinner. I'll bring fruit or a bottle of wine. I mean, whatever, Pam. We're just forging our relationship now, but I'm just, we're just, Opera House, the Bay, just tossing things out. Thank you so much for joining, Sydney. Thank you for joining from Sydney, Pam. And I hope you have found this beneficial and useful. And I look forward to seeing you more. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Yes, my comments just shifted and I lost my place, which is awesome. Let me just scroll down. Brenda wrote at 7:47 p.m. Ethan, did you say last week that you were born with OCD? I didn't even know that was possible. Great question. So, the way we say we're born with OCD is a bit of a wink. But I think as early as I can remember, my first thoughts were obsessive and intrusive thoughts, fears about death and things that might happen to me, and worry and things that might happen to my mom and all of the above. Did I not say the time, Skyla? Am I in trouble? Just like text me an exclamation mark if I'm in trouble. Private chat that. Make a smiley face if I'm not in trouble, just because I'm nervous I'm in trouble. So, when we say we're born with OCD, it's more like not remembering a time where we didn't, oh, I'm in trouble. Shoot. I could have sworn I read the time code. I'm so sorry, Skyla. We don't remember a time where there weren't obsessions and compulsions and fears. So it's very likely that you can be born with OCD because as early as I can remember, I was demonstrating obsessive and compulsive behavior. And it can be treated as early as 2.5. So, but that's not to say that individuals with OCD, whenever it comes on, usually have a predisposition to it. Again, it can lay dormant and present itself. Puberty is common. When you go to college is common. Giving birth, perinatal, postpartum, and even later in life. And usually when it comes on later in life, you can look back as you get educated and see periods of time where it impacted you that you didn't realize it impacted you. But as far as I'm concerned, I've always said I was born with it. Maybe it's Maybelline, sorry, that I was born with it. And I know a bunch of people who say the same. So yeah, great question. And thank you so much for the kind words about being in a psychiatric hospital. And I'm glad you had a good, I didn't tell that story to deter people from seeking treatment in psychiatric hospitals, whether it's, an OCD specific or anything. I think that it was a combination of where I was. I mean, different states, different facilities are completely different. My cousin is actually CEO of a hospital system in California, and they're all psychiatric hospitals, and they're amazing. Where I was in Florida was absolutely terrifying. And it also depends why you were there. I would never suggest that anybody not go if they're in crisis, and I was in crisis. And but unfortunately, OCD is still so misunderstood. And if you're not in an OCD specific residential program, hopefully that isn't the case. In my case, it was. I know other folks that have had similar experiences. Hopefully, as we continue to advocate and share stories, will reduce the occurrences that OCD is misdiagnosed, even when you go with a diagnosis of OCD, which is what my case was. But thank you, Debbie, for sharing. I'm always glad to hear that your experience was beneficial, because that's really important. So thank you for sharing that. I know we're running just about out of time. You're welcome, ZSMH. I'm glad. Welcome, and I hope you come back. A few quick questions at the end. See, Eric's, my earliest OCD memories come to about age 4. So we are, it can start very, very early for sure. Wow, 2 great questions. All right, let me answer these 2 questions, and then we'll end if y'all are okay. Skylar, you okay going just a minute or 2 over? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Skylar. So real quick, what do you do when someone is obsessing about time? Any ideas? Well, I guess I would need a little bit more insight into that. At first, when I glanced at it, I said obsessing all the time, and I was going to answer that. This is a little bit longer question. I mean, at the end of the day, I'll always say the same thing I always say, which is, try to engage an expert in exposure response prevention. And, so are you referring to someone who's late often or concerned about time specifically? Feel free to comment, and I will give my email address at the end, and you can ask me. That's my fault. I thought you asked something else, which I thought I could answer pretty quickly. But please, so feel free to email. Angie at 7:55 p.m. said, how to cook food when you have intrusive thoughts. Great question, because I relate to it. And I relate to a lot of this. How to reduce intrusive thoughts if it takes you your whole day. So I get cooking is triggering for me, and it still is, because I have OCD around food, and if it's gone bad, or if it's raw or undercooked, food poisoning, things like that. So depending on what I'm cooking, it can be really intense. And there are still foods that I'm like not as quick to cook as other foods, and other foods that I've cooked regularly that I may not have been quick to cook before. I cook all the time now. I don't think much of it. So in short, how do you cook when you have intrusive thoughts? Well, I'm assuming your intrusive thoughts are about food. You may be asking the same thing as our friend Gentile from Brazil. Thank you, Angie. How to stop washing and washing dishes over and over when you already washed it like 3 times. Okay. And I'm guessing because they're not clean or might be contaminated or whatever. And I did the same thing with my hands. If I was cooking chicken or something, like I can never, you're welcome, Patricia. I can never get it clean enough, right? So we have to live with the discomfort. The OCD is never going to be satisfied, is the short answer of it, is that, it's appropriate to, wash the dish 1 time with soap and hot water, or dump it in the thing that washes dishes for you, the dishwasher. Hey, now we're, so sorry, I was reading back in the chat. So, and this goes for anybody listening, your OCD will never be satisfied, which is why we keep doing the compulsions. It alleviates the anxiety, and then it comes back. So in this case, you have to be willing for whatever the fears associated with the dish not being clean to be there, and to be a real possibility. I've gotten really good at cooking eggs. Chicken is still anxiety provoking for me, and I probably avoid it more than I should, just being honest. I eat it all the time regardless. Yeah, cooking it is a different story, but I will be cooking chicken this week. I'm sure if Katie's watching, she's rolling her eyes, but I will. But eggs for me, like I would do the same thing. If a raw egg touched me, I would wash my hands 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times. The more you do it and the more you don't compulse, the easier it gets. And now, I mean, like I got stuff all over me and I kind of just rinse off my hands and keep going. And it was kind of an unintentional, hey, Chad, Tally in the house. What's up, man? Sorry, I distracted myself. But yeah, and I never thought it was unintentional, right? I just was like, I want to cook eggs, and because I don't cook that often, and it's one of the things I cook, and the more I cook, just the easier it got, which is essentially habituation. And I habituated because I didn't want to wash my hands 100 times, trying to get, any raw egg off. That isn't to say that the obsessive thoughts aren't there when I cook it. It just means to say that I don't necessarily engage in multiple hand washing. So your goal and your challenge, should you choose to accept it, is next time you cook, you should wash a dish, wash it once, and put it away. And I know it's going to feel really gross and really uncomfortable and really awful, whatever the thoughts come. But the cycle continues unless you break it. So Angie, we're on 2 weeks from tonight. I expect you to be here, and I want you to tell me that you cooked something and that you washed a dish once and you put it away. And it's okay if it feels awful or terrible. We wash dishes and cry. That's our saying around here. But that's my challenge to you, Angie, and see how you do with that. I look forward to hearing how it goes. And obviously there's tons of resources and so forth and so on and treatment. But that's what I would do. And then whatever the fear is, try to let that be there. Try to let it wash over you. Try to accept the uncertainty around that. I know it feels like you can't take it, but see how, and let me break it down even further. Do it with one dish. And if you don't feel like you're willing to do it, just leave it. Like maybe commit to 10 minutes put away. And I do realize that if you put the dish on top of a dish, it could contaminate the dishes, but how long are you willing to try that for? Right. So let's break things down. If that seems too intense or too intimidating, can you wash a dish once and put it on the counter? And how long can you leave it there? And then if it subsides enough that you can put it away, great. If you need to wash it again, then I would prefer you don't, but wash it again. Sometimes I cook twice. Yeah, I get all of that. The cooking can be tricky. And I've done all of those things. Get intrusive thoughts every time I try to cut any vegetable. What can I do then? I leave it out and take another. It happens because you have OCD. Angela, you wrote, why does this happen? It happens because you have OCD. And OCD sticks to many things and can give you lots of scary thoughts and intrusive thoughts and feelings and whatever it is around your specific, I don't know what your exact thought is, but when it comes up, the way to make that discomfort and that feeling go away is to compulse, whether that's rewashing a dish or grabbing another vegetable or whatever it is. So I want you to understand that it's OCD. It's not a decision. It's a disorder. It's a disease, and it can be treated. And so I want you to know that there's hope and help. And if you visit the IOCDF.org website, and you can learn a lot more about it, and there's treatment. And I'll also, as I always say, give out my email at the end. And you can always email me and we can talk further about it. But I'm proud of you for being here and for having the conversation with me. And I totally relate. Cooking isn't the easiest thing for me either. Lastly, thank you, Skyla Megan. Concerned about how long something takes when everything is very hard. Okay. So obsessing about time. So, it isn't, that's not necessarily about obsessing about time. It's really obsessing about this idea of everything is really hard, so it's going to take too long. If that makes sense. Thank you, Skylos. Concerned about how long something takes when everything is very hard. Yeah. So that's very common because as we engage in compulsions, things take longer to do. We become late. We get wrapped up. Compulsions can last for 8, 9, 10, 11 hours. So we then engage in avoidance behaviors to not have those compulsions and not get stuck in that loop. So that's very, very, very common. And the question isn't so much obsessing about time, but it's how much time is the compulsions taking up. And please tell me, Megan, if I'm getting that wrong. But that's how I'm understanding your question. So then it becomes more about, what can we do to address the root cause, which is the OCD in and of itself. And, when you get into treatment and therapy and all that stuff, your obsessions start to reduce, your compulsions start to reduce, and those amounts of time start to lessen. So simply put, individuals that were taking, 7-hour showers don't take showers because it takes 7 hours. And they were very concerned about, well, if I get started, I won't be able to stop. And therefore it's going to take, this long. And when you engage in treatment, there are a lot of support and a lot of exposures around lessening those time. You start timing your showers and doing less and less and less and less until you're taking, normal length showers. So that's totally understandable. And I think we've all sort of been there, looking at the time and being worried about, like, oh my gosh, how much time is this going to take up? What am I going to miss if I start getting wrapped into my OCD and my loop? So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Y'all are awesome. I love all these comments. I always love this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. Some quick things, then I'll give out my email. So stick around. As always, I want to thank the IOCDF and Skyla behind the scenes for keeping the lights on, even though I made her crazy today. I'm sorry, Skyla. Tomorrow, you can join Dr. Liz McInville and Chris Tronsden for a brand new Ask the Experts live stream with Carolyn Rodriguez to answer pre-submitted medication questions, but you can also ask questions in the chat. You can submit questions and suggestions for future live stream topics at iocdf.org/peace of mind. Incidentally, Carolyn Rodriguez is awesome. Great friend, brilliant clinician, out of Stanford, smart, and doing some really innovative, cool stuff in clinical trial research around OCD and seeking different treatments. And she's done some amazing work as well. So highly recommend you tune into that if you have the time. That's at 12 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Registration is open for the 27th annual conference taking place in Denver this July. The special event is for the entire OCD and related disorders community, including individuals, family supporters, therapists, and researchers. You can learn more at iocdf.org/OCDCon. I'll be there. It's awesome. If you can make it, try and make it. It's totally worth it. An amazing 3 days of community, understanding, and just you can learn so much about it. It's like an intensive, right? You get in what you put out, and there really are amazing opportunities to speak with incredible therapists and find resources and meet an incredible community and make lifelong friends. Lastly, join us for the 1 Million Steps for OCD Walk this June and October. Find a walk near you and register at iocdf.org/walk for a day, community, advocacy, and fun. Lastly, this live stream is one of many. You can see the entire schedule and submit questions and suggestions for future streams at iocdf.org/peace of mind. You can view the recordings of past live streams on IOCDF's YouTube page, which is youtube.com/IOCDF. I know we're all writing this down. And lastly, to be notified of when we're going live, follow the IOCDF on social media and subscribe on YouTube. So when we go online, you're welcome, Gentile. And email me about Brazil, and I'm happy to give suggestions. Subscribe and follow so you're notified. And as always, if you need resources, I know we've given out this website, iocdf.org. Lastly, my email, questions, comments, concerns, you agree, you disagree, you don't like my outfit, my glasses suck, my hair should be parted on the other way. Email me at justethan@iocdf.org. I'm the only one that checks this email. This does not go through the foundation, although it is a foundation email. It goes directly to me. And so everything that you say and write an email is, I was just at the end and I forgot the word, is Skyla. I'm whining. Skyla, what's the word? It's not confidential. It's confidential. Doing great. Okay. Well, with that, thank you so much for going a little late over. Thank you, Skyla, for going a little late over. And thank you for spending your Tuesday night with me, as always. 2 weeks from tonight, another community conversation. Next week, I'll be hosting the town hall with Reed Wilson. So tune in then. With all of that, stay safe, stay vigilant, feel the feels, don't let OCD off the hook. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks so much. Have a good night.